All right, welcome to the Patent and Psychedelics panel. This is a panel focused on the role of patents in protecting innovation, stimulating research, and shaping the competitive landscape. So this renaissance in psychedelic medicine is taking a primarily medicalized route with compounds and treatments going through the clinical trial process, which is a long road that can cost hundreds of millions of dollars with no guarantee necessarily of FDA approval. So how do companies justify such large and sometimes risky investments? Intellectual property protection is something that allows them to sell their product without competitors infringing on their market. So it's a complex landscape with lots of moving pieces, so we have some experts from the space to speak about it. So we'll go down the line and let them introduce themselves. Sam, say hello.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm the CEO of Terran Biosciences. I did my undergrad degree neuroscience at MIT and my MD PhD at Columbia. I founded Terran in 2017 with the goal of building a new kind of company to bring new treatments to patients as quickly as possible. I'm excited to speak with you today.
My name is David Wood. I'm a lawyer and patent agent working at Psygen. It's a contract manufacturer based in Calgary, Alberta. We manufacture psychedelics for use in clinical trials, and our customers are the ones who execute on the trials. I have a PhD in biochemistry, and I joined Psygen in 2021 after leaving a partnership at a national law firm in Canada.
And we have Thomas.
Good morning, I'm Tom Digby. I'm a 30 years in the patent early stage biotech business, all startups, except for 10 years that I spent with Novartis. So I spent 10 years inside the machine in Boston and in Switzerland and have a global IP perspective. I'm the IP strategy lead at Clairvoyant. So we're developing psilocybin, and we intend to be first to market in Europe, the UK, and Canada with psilocybin. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, everyone. So I guess we'll go down the line. Maybe give maybe we'll start with Sam, a brief introduction as to what you're up to at Terran and with a focus maybe on IP strategy.
No, absolutely. So at Terran, we've taken a multi-pronged approach to IP, and we have to remember that the most important financial stakeholder here is the patient. With mental illnesses being so diverse, we need to bring diverse treatments to patients, and we need to bring cost-effective medications to patients. And so we have a multi-pronged patent strategy to accomplish that. So the first, let's cover novel treatments. The first is that we have a robust pro-drug program at Terran where we take classic psychedelics, which have been shown to be safe and effective, and we improve upon them. Now, a prodrug is when you take a normally active drug that has some pharmacokinetic issues in the body, and you attach an extra side chain or extra moiety to it, and that enables it to do things such as bypass the liver or become more easily absorbed in the gastrointestinal system. And it gives but then it falls off in the bloodstream, allowing the natural, normal compound to reach the brain. Well, natural if it's psilocybin or synthetic if it's LSD, but the main studied compound to then reach the brain. Now, we've done this with a lot of success. I'll give you an example. DMT and 5-methoxy-DMT are not traditionally orally active. And we know you can make 5-methoxy-DMT orally active if you take really big doses, but that's not easy to target in a clinic, and without an MAO inhibitor combination, DMT is just broken down by liver too quickly. Now, there's ways of administering it, such as inhalation or smoking, but that's not easy to do in a clinical setting, at least for other drugs that we've seen that are approved with that same sort of route of administration. To reach the most patients possible, we said this needs to be made into a compound that you can just take as a pill. If you take it in combination with an MAO inhibitor, though, you can get blood pressure changes, nausea, vomiting. So to make it more accessible for patients, we created prodrugs that are orally active. Then we did the same thing with MDMA, noting that in phase 3 studies of MDMA, it wears off relatively quickly. And when it's wearing off quickly, they're trying to redose it in the middle of a therapeutic session. So we made a longer acting prodrug that is releasing just normal MDMA, but it's lasting in our animal models 8 hours. It lasts twice as long as normal MDMA, but still enables just unmodified MDMA to reach the brain. And then the other side, to make things cost effective, we've developed new salts and polymorphs of classic psychedelics to enable us to do 505(b)(2) applications, putting essentially generic drugs that would still have patent protection on the market within submit the application 5.5 years after they're first applied for approval, so we can make sure we bring cost-effective medications to patients, and we have plans for that in the DMT space, LSD space, MDMA space, and most importantly, the psilocybin space.
All right, so yeah, so there's a lot of sides. I think there's the novel prodrug approach, there's the generic approach. Maybe we could talk about that. David, how do you think that the psychedelic space, as a patent agent, is there a unique aspect to psychedelics different from other biotech? Maybe comment a bit on that.
No. But
No.
What's different is, sorry, Mike, what's different is the context. We don't really have another area of pharmaceuticals where there's several promising drugs, and I'd say MDMA and psilocybin have the most evidence. I think LSD will probably find its way in there as well as DMT. There's probably a reason Sam used all of those as examples, because those drugs work. The efficacy is strong. As Sam mentioned, they have some issues and can be improved. Let's hope with Terran's technology, because like Sam, I'm focused on the patient, and if it's your products or someone else's, great, as long as this stuff gets to people. And what's different is that you have these at least four promising drugs that you can't patent outside of polymorphs and salts and like what you've done, but the straight composition of matter, here's the structure, I own that, that doesn't exist. So it just changes it's just an unusual subset of pharma in my mind. And then I think the other two factors that kind of throw curveballs into this is that there's a lot of therapy involved. So, and you can talk about that with your products a bit, how a lot of psychedelics, you don't just give them to people to take home, they take them in therapy. We all know this, I'm not gonna make that point. But that changes the financial model relative to just dispensing pills. And then I think the last part that throws a bit of a curveball is the fact that the first drug, probably to hit the market, is being brought by a public benefit corp. That's unusual, to say the least, for pharmaceuticals, but no, nothing, they're chemicals you can patent or not if they're novel, inventive, etc.
Let's bring Thomas in. What's your perspective and what you're working on at Clairvoyant?
Yeah, so the MDMA is coming to market with MAPS, and I think that that's a perfect example. So that's a classical psychedelic that's been known for 80 years. It's been out there, and it's very different. So what Sam was talking about was about novel compounds that Terran has created. Pharma is mostly interested in novel compounds. I think people understand that because you can get a great patent position on them. So anyone who's in the audience who's working on a new type of psychedelic, a novel one, that's very attractive to pharma. The question that David was raising there is, what about MDMA? So that's an old compound. Now here's the important thing. When you work for pharma, what you're mostly concerned about is what's going to happen at the end of the day when the generics come in. Okay, you're going to spend tens of millions getting your product to market, but a generic can make a copy for 5 cents a pill. It's super cheap for the generic to come in, but the generic is kept out of the marketplace by something that's called data exclusivity. So you don't even have to have a patent to get data exclusivity. And the brilliant thing about MAPS is that in the US, you have 5 years of data exclusivity under the Hatch-Waxman Act. So that prevents any generic from relying on the clinical data of MAPS to come to market. So I think MAPS has a huge opportunity there to really expand, to teach the world how to use MDMA, to take it to clinics all through the US. They'll have 5 years. But shortly after that, the generics are going to come in because there is no patent. So this is how pharma is thinking of these things. And it's a similar case in psilocybin, but we'll get to that later.
Right. So data exclusivity is going to be a strategy for some players in the space, especially MAPS. How do you see this unfolding? Focus on MAPS as the first example of what it's going to be. How do you see it happening once we get approval?
Yeah, so I think that's a good point. Now let's look at a couple of different scenarios. Assuming they do get their approval on schedule, they'll have the data exclusivity. Now, what data exclusivity means is that if you want to put a generic drug on the market, you only have two options. You wait 5.5 years in the US, and then you do a little bioequivalency study saying, hey, my pill can reach the same blood levels as their pill on the market, so I'm going to reference their data to put the pill on the market pretty quickly. That's usually a pretty good strategy because it takes about 5 years for the drug to get accepted in the market and you start ramping up your sales. That's a 5-year process already. So right as they're starting to reach peak sales, you put your generic on the market. And to be clear, Terran plans to put generic MDMA on the market. We have full GMP MDMA manufacturing set up, new processes that took us 2 years to develop, and we're pumping out MDMA right now. But there's a second way. If you wanted to get around that, the data exclusivity does not block 505(b)(1)s. You can go do the studies again, or studies in a new indication, and put your drug on the market earlier, but usually it doesn't make sense to do that because it can take 5 years to do 2 phase 3 studies, and by then you might as well have just waited for the data exclusivity to expire.
Any additions to that, David?
No, not a lot. That makes sense. And then I'm curious, actually, you'd probably have some insight on this with prodrugs. How is that also an easier step? Because I've always thought of a prodrug as a new API, but it sounds like you understand that a bit more deeply.
Yeah, so with prodrugs, you have a unique way actually to get your drug approved. As long as you show the prodrug itself is basically inert until it breaks down in the body, releasing the active compound. And I'll give you an example. Our long-acting MDMA. You take, if the theory is that that would be inert in the body and that it would release just MDMA over a long period of time, it's the same strategy. You can wait the 5.5 years exclusivity expires, do this study and show bioequivalency of your MDMA to MAPS, but a superior release profile. Then when you get your drug on the market, doctors potentially would want to use yours instead because it has a better pharmacokinetic profile. It has advantages for patients. It could last longer, so they don't have to worry about redosing. So there's potentials for that to actually replace the original MDMA on the market, and Pharma likes it because that drug would have 20 years of patent protection as a new chemical entity.
It's probably worth also recognizing that since it'd be patented, subject to legislation, I don't actually know if you have this in the States, but in Canada we have a patented medicines price review board. The government gets involved on prices with patented drugs. If you have the subject to anything like that in the States, I think you can charge what you want for the prodrug as well, right? You can kind of set your own rates on the market.
There is pricing flexibility for sure, and I think for Terran, the biggest thing that we factor into when thinking about future pricing is how we can bring the most value to the patient. Because we have a lot of things in our portfolio, so we especially don't want to price any drugs where they're inaccessible to patients. For our goal is of bringing multiple different drugs to market at accessible prices so that everybody has access to these life-changing medications. I mean, just look, MDMA has produced amazing results in post-traumatic stress disorder since the 1980s. You know, that's a long time ago to finally, get approval now. And so patients are suffering, and we really need to move quickly to get these drugs to the patients.
Yeah, is part of the strategy maybe...
So I love this.
Yeah, go ahead, Thomas.
Bringing prodrugs to market. I mean, that really can improve patient therapy. There are some prodrugs that don't quite qualify for new chemical entity status. These would be ester drugs. So back in the 1984, when Hatch-Waxman first went in the Reagan era, they were aware that Pharma did have these evergreening strategies, such as with certain kinds of prodrugs. And they don't actually count for the 5 years data exclusivity, but other prodrugs do, other different types of prodrugs. And I know Sam and Taryn know a lot about that. So when they can get a patent on the new prodrug that also gets them data exclusivity. I want to highlight one important point about, Sam talks about 5.5 years in the US, which it is, and it's a solid platform to build a new market. In Canada, there's 8 years of data exclusivity. And in Europe, there's 10 years. And you can actually extend that by another year in Europe. You get 11 years in Europe and the UK. So there's it's a considerably different dynamic if you want to take your product to Europe, which, as I described off the top, that's where Clairvoyant is focused. That big market there, much longer build-up time. And there is, of course, the risk that someone else will bring an innovative, like as in a 505(b)(1) version forward, but the amount of money you have to spend to bring that to market, only to face generic competition, is really prohibitive for most CFOs. People typically won't invest in that. So being second to market is not particularly attractive if you're going with a data exclusivity only strategy.
Yeah, so that's it. So data exclusivity can be a financially interesting strategy, IP-wise. I know some investors would like to have secured IP, more patents in place. Do we think that data exclusivity is something that can make a product interesting enough for investors?
Let me comment on that, and I think you brought up a great point, and that it just comes down to the financial calculation that most companies would do. For example, if MDMA is approved in Europe and they have 10 years of data exclusivity, but the sales are very low, and people would say, well, it doesn't make sense for me to do another phase 3 to get it approved. In the US, you need 2 phase 3s, but in Europe, sometimes you can get by with 1 phase 3, and depending on the data package. So it's a conversation with the EMA. But the idea, at the end of the day, it just comes down to, you look at the costs of the phase 3, the endpoints, and then you look at, does it make sense to do this, or does it make sense to wait, the 10 years? And part of that cost, that calculation, comes down to, am I really bringing something innovative? If you're just bringing the same drug in a generic form, it might not make sense. If you're bringing a prodrug with a lot of pharmacokinetic advantages that you think would replace the original drug on the market, it might make sense to just do that phase 3, get your drug approved, let's say, in 5 years, and not have to wait the extra total 10 years. But it's always that calculation. So it's a conversation, essentially.
And you asked at the start if there's anything special about psychedelics, and the point about all the existing known compounds that work, that's why we're talking about data exclusivity so much. In a typical case where you don't have multiple companies chasing the same API, a company will develop a drug, they'll patent the molecule, and no one else works on it. And then when they get it approved, unless they're within 5 years of the last patent that applies to their product, the data exclusivity is pretty secondary, right? It's more about their patents.
Is data exclusivity enough for institutional biotech investors to want to put money into something without more solid patents in place? Do you think that's enough to attract bigger investments?
I think it depends on the market. Yeah, I mean, big pharma is going to always do that calculation. Sorry, go ahead.
It does depend on the market for sure. It also depends. So a lot of the classic psychedelics are known to be very, very safe. So the biggest risk with a new product is that somehow it's going to have some unknown toxicity that we didn't know about, that it causes some kind of weird brain reaction or cardiovascular effect or some kind of cancer in rats. That's what you get with new compounds. With the classic psychedelics, we're pretty sure they're safe. I mean, most of them are natural products at some level. And their dosages are we use them at very low doses, maybe once or twice in a course of treatment. So there's a safety factor which makes the classic psychedelics attractive to pharma. It happens all the time. New compounds get right into phase 3, and somewhere in the late phase 3 trial, there's just some obscure toxicity that shows up, and they have to wind the whole thing down. So that's always the risk with novel compounds.
And while you have the mic, maybe tell us a little bit more about what Clairvoyant's working on with some of your developments.
So clairvoyance using psilocybin in alcohol use disorder. So we're running with the data, basically the Bogenschutz created at NYU Langone, who showed a clear separation between placebo treatment and and then the psilocybin treatment in terms of the number of heavy drinking days after 2 doses of psilocybin. People's drinking goes way down. So based on that, we're running a phase 2b trial. We're expecting interim data on that in February next year, and then the trial will be complete by the end of June next year, and we'll get top line data. So we're in Finland, 4 sites in Finland, 8 sites in Canada, and hoping to open up in Europe. Recruitment is always the challenge in any clinical trial. So we are, fortunately, we're recruiting at the high end of our expected rates of recruitment. So we do see a lot of interest in this psilocybin therapy. And we're hoping with data exclusivity. Obviously, the biggest elephant in the room is our close competitor, Compass, who is an excellent company, and we're looking at who's going to be first there in order to who's going to get the data exclusivity that you need.
So it's a race to data exclusivity? I guess so. Maybe a little bit more about first to market versus not first to market. How much do you think that that's going to provide a benefit to companies? Is there going to be some sort of name recognition of being there? How much of a factor do you think that's going to be going forward?
I mean, I think we have to look to the examples that we already see across, all the other pharmaceuticals, because there's nothing really that different about psychedelics when you come down to it. And in that sense, you do have some name brand drugs that people like to take. But we also see that I think one of the most important driving factors is just having cost-effective access. And generics really do bring down the price, and that can be a great thing for bringing access to a cost-effective medication to more people.
I'd also point this out. I think we can all recognize the MAPS is a big name in this, and maybe everyone in this room, if they were going to do MDMA therapy, would prefer MAPS. But think outside this room, think outside your circle. No one knows, no one cares. If their doctor says you're getting MDMA, they probably will never even know what company it came from. That's my guess.
No, definitely.
That's true. And there's a huge amount of pressure on the formulary in any hospital. So the pharmacy, they're said, okay, well, we need 100 doses of MDMA, and you have the innovator who's priced it at $1,000 a pill, and you have the generic that's priced it at $200 a pill. And so at the formulary level, they just say, well, we'll take the generic. It's the exact same stuff. And there's a ton of cost pressure, and it does bring the cost down to the patient as well. So everyone benefits when the generic comes in. The problem is teaching the market how these drug works is hard work. And it's unless you have a suitable period of exclusivity, you can't afford to invest in teaching doctors and nurses and setting up treatment rooms and clinics. And that's a ton of work, and the generics never do that. So it's why we need the innovators to get out there and create these markets that eventually the generics can come into.
Go ahead. Well, there's one additional thing I wanted to bring up specifically related to this topic in the data exclusivity, is that because psychedelics have no official composition of matter patent left, the classic ones on the original molecule, we've seen a strategy deployed to try to lock in 20 years of composition of matter using salts and polymorphs. And in that sense, what we saw in psilocybin was that because psilocybin is a zwitterion, it was long thought to not be able to form additional salts or polymorphs. And because there's only 3 main known polymorphs of the zwitterion, whoever controlled those 3 forms would essentially have a patent that could block out any generic, because any generic would ultimately be one of the 3 polymorphs. And if you have patents, 20 years of protection granted on 3 polymorphs, you could essentially control the full psilocybin supply of a solid oral form of psilocybin that use those basically the psilocybin pills for 20 years. Now, at Terran, we saw that as a major impediment to patient access. Because if then that's 20 years of controlling the pricing on psilocybin. So what we said is we hired one of the world's best teams of solid-state chemists, and we met with them. We said, "Can you make new salts and polymorphs?" They said, "Well, it's a zwitterion. It really can't, but we'll try." And after a year of really hard work, we created the world's first alternative salts and polymorphs of psilocybin. We now have the patent on psilocybin hydrochloride, psilocybin hydrochloride co-crystal, and we've made a number of other salts and polymorphs. And that enables Terran to put a 505(b)(2) application for psilocybin 5.5 years after whoever gets it approved first. And we absolutely intend to do that. And in preparation, we've developed fully new patented manufacturing processes. We've scaled them up to commercial scale. We have a big plant manufacturing it right now, and we are ready to go and very excited about getting patient access on a 505(b)(2) in a short period of time.
That sounds great. Yeah, I mean, all of this, I mean, there's competition happening and there's financial factors, but the generic aspect can really increase patient access. So I'm happy that people in the space who are doing the development are focused on that, because it's definitely going to be an issue going forward. Anything else, Thomas? You want to jump in with something?
Yeah, I've looked through the Terran patent portfolio. It's quite impressive. So I see 34 international PCT applications, and according to my simple math, they spent over $500,000 on filing these patents. And the amount of research that went in behind that has to be, several times that amount. So I wish, a great deal of success to Terran. The novel compounds, the completely novel compounds will be very attractive to pharma. Most of the polymorphs, the prodrugs, will be also attractive to pharma. So I think there's a lot of potential in the Terran portfolio as well. So, I'll give a call out to Terran for putting together a very interesting project.
Thank you.
Any final comments from anyone? No, it's been a great discussion. Always a pleasure, Sam, and Tom, and hope everyone enjoys the conference.
Yeah, same here. No, thanks. And Microdose is definitely going to cover all your developments. So feel free to send me your news. We look forward to announcing what we're working on, and I'll see you on a panel later today. And thanks, David. Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, Sam, and thank you to the audience. And enjoy the conference.
Round of applause